Hello everyone, I'm Kevin, otherwise known as Forum BX257, here to bring you another 1980s G.I. Joe toy review. And today I'll be taking a look at the G.I. Joe's Deceptive Warfare Expert, the 1987 Psyche-Out. Psyche-Out doesn't make any cartoon appearances like a lot of 1987 and 1988 characters, but he makes his first comic book appearance in the Old Marvel comic run of G.I. Joe in issue number 64. Now, this is going to be a Halloween episode, and in the past I've done Dr. Mindbender, Crystal Ball, the Range Viper, the Saw Viper, but this will be my first G.I. Joe for my Halloween episode. And, well, it's not hard to see why. With his Deceptive Warfare specialty, basically psy-ops, or psychological operations, this is a guy who messes with the mind of the bad guys. But is that really an interesting concept for a toy? If you had this toy as a kid, did you play with him as intended?
Before I take a look at the figure, I'd like to take a note of the file card first. Something I've always found particularly interesting is his rank. As you can see here, he's a lieutenant, an officer. And while it's not unusual for people with degrees or doctorates or people with really high education upon enlistment to get a pay grade upgrade over your normal infantry soldier, the fact of the matter is that it also mentions Fort Bragg. Now that's a real place, and while it has a lot of different divisions in the Army and I think the Air Force as well, I'm not quite sure, but that's also a place where a lot of command divisions go. And in the comic book, not only was he a trained psychologist and actually make diagnosis on his fellow G.I. Joes, he was also in command of certain missions as well. So it's entirely possible that that rank is not just reflective of his education upon enlistment, but his actual command experience. First, let's take a look at Psyche-Out's accessories. He comes with only one weapon, well, in the traditional sense anyway. What the contents list on the card calls a .45 caliber assault pistol. As far as I can tell, this is not really based on any particular real-world design. It's just sort of generic, which is very odd because up until this point, most of the firearms that were given to G.I. Joes were based on, or at least hinted at, being based on real-world firearms. Next, he comes with a pair of what the contents list on the card calls big ear sonic receivers. Now, as you can see, they're just clipped onto his wrist. They're a two-piece device, the red part being a dish, and they're fairly easy to come apart. It's fairly interesting that he comes with a receiver, because that means that he's actually receiving either some type of audio, audible, or radio frequency being picked up here, like a communications officer, but there's nothing to hint at exactly why he's doing that. Next, he comes with a variable wave field projector with ELF sonic generator. And yes, I did just read that off the contents list of the card because there's no way I'm going to remember all that gobbledygook. And that's what this thing is. As a matter of fact, the projector portion is the dish on the front, and the sonic generator is the rest of the device. As you can see, that just popped off fairly easily. Now here is where we get into Dr. Mindbender territory, because this is the thing which generates the non-audible waves which affect people's brains. In other words, this is the Paranoia Array. And again, I'm really not sure how kids would have played with this thing. This is total bad guy territory, even though, yes, I am quite aware that the not only the US, but quite a few allied countries do actually dabble in black box technology. So, yeah. Anyway, it did, of course, have a little handle on the top, which is fairly good for figures. It's not overly large that it would break thumbs, and it's not overly small that it would just slip out of the hand. One thing I did find fairly interesting is this thing on the back, which looks like a rotary knob. Unfortunately, it isn't really detailed with little tick marks, but I could just imagine pretending to, or dial it up a notch, to go from mildly uncomfortable all the way to the top, being raving lunatic. And last but not least, he comes with a backpack. Yeah, that's what the contents list just calls it. A backpack. No fancy name, no nothing. Just backpack. And I'm not quite sure what it's supposed to do because of that. There's a lot of technology on here, as well as 2 antennas. Actually, the 2 antennas kind of remind me of something like a Tesla coil or something like that. Anyway, one fairly interesting thing about the construction of the backpack is that it's not one solid piece of plastic. These antennas totally pop out. They're not supposed to. I'm not sure if they're supposed to be glued in place or what, but yeah, both of them just sort of pop out of there. So that's something that you better be prepared to look for if you're looking for one of these on the aftermarket. Make sure they actually have the antennas at the back. They won't be snapped off, they'll always be just sort of popped out. Now, even though you have to put the receivers and the ELF generator together, you didn't have to put this together, and you didn't have to put the back of his head together either. Yeah. See this, yet another antenna? Well, that's actually removable as well. As you can see, you can totally unplug this from the back of his head. It's not supposed to do that, and just like the backpack antennas, I'm pretty sure this was supposed to be glued in here and permanent. You didn't have to assemble this from the card. It just came like, he just came like this with this thing stuck in the back of his head. And I'll probably get more into that as I go through the details of the figure, but man, this thing looks very weird. Without his accessories on, Psyche-Out actually does continue on with his silver, red, and black details on here, but I'm just going to address the elephant in the room here, and that is his ridiculous, bright, neon green Fooler. And, well, it's stitched on top of that, so it's like a half Fooler or half sweater thing that he's wearing. I don't know. I really don't know how to explain this. I mean, the black portion, which is going around here, is not really part of that t-shirt thing. It's really something which is just hooked onto whatever this thing is, and probably a bit of back support for his backpack. Again, it's really nice that, he has the silver and red and, the overall black, details, which carry over from his accessories. That's nice. It's just, man, this thing the green really just detracts from the whole figure. I can really see why people really don't like this figure, because, I mean, honestly, if he was more subdued, he would probably look a lot more like a communications officer. He does have a really big badge on his sleeve here, but I'm not quite sure what it's supposed to be. Some collectors say that the patch looks like a stylized version of the Army's 3rd Armored Corps or Phantom Corps triad. To me, it looks like the 3rd Army Logistical Command triad, with the arrows forming the triangle. Now, one thing I always found fairly interesting are these big black buttons on his sleeve. They kind of look like mime buttons or Pierrot buttons, but I really think they're meant to be part of the clips. Kind of like how you have like adjustable ratchets, so you can just sort of ratchet this thing up and down. I mean, obviously it doesn't go up, the receivers don't go up and down because it's fairly hard plastic. But I just imagine them to be either ratchets or maybe contact points for the receivers and not actual, sleeve buttons. It's fairly interesting that he has, this, what I'm guessing is a holster on the side here, which is nice because, that goes along with his pistol. Unfortunately, you can't put it in there, and, well, quite frankly, I don't like a silver holster because that, makes it look like it's made out of metal. That's really not what you would want a holster to be made out of. I kind of wish they had just left that black like the rest of the middle portion of his outfit here, and applied that silver onto the knife here, because he has a big, fairly bayonet-looking dagger on the side, and you can barely see it because it's not painted in. Everything else is painted in, like little buckles, the back straps, and I mention that because, yeah, sometimes Hasbro misses, painting things on the back because, you don't usually see it, and they want to save on the budget so they can put it somewhere else, but, why not that dagger? That should have been black or silver or something. Taking a closer look at his head, I'm not going to make any lowbot jokes about his techno earmuffs, because I actually do think they look pretty good. They're red and silver, just like his accessories, so you can imagine them not only just being like radio receivers, but also something to tune out the specific frequencies that he's dealing out. He's not going to become paranoid himself by listening to his own radio waves. And then again, he has that crazy 80s hair. It makes him look like a negative image of Bob from the reboot show. As far as I'm concerned, Psyche-Out is not a replacement for any pre-existing G.I. Joe character. With his very unique specialty, well, quite frankly, the only other Deceptive Warfare figures are two more versions of Psyche-Out himself. But if you go by his file card with his very high education and the fact that he may be in the command structure, I'd say the only thing that he really replaces is really Flint. And that's only by a very large stretch. I think we all know who I would choose as Psyche-Out's opposite number on the Cobra side, because I've already mentioned him. It's the 1986 Dr. Mindbender, Master of Mind Control. One fairly interesting thing about this matchup is that Hasbro originally intended Dr. Mindbender to be an interrogator, so the device he comes with is actually an electrical prod meant to torture his victims into revealing their secrets. Something that Hasbro actually got cold feet at the very last minute, and decided to manipulate his file card into saying that he used brainwave devices in order to manipulate victims. Remind you of anything that this particular figure came with? Yeah, that ELF generator is definitely a brainwave device here. So this Psyche-Out actually refers back to Dr. Mindbender's file card better than Dr. Mindbender does. If you're looking for a Psyche-Out on the aftermarket, he's actually fairly easy to find, complete with all of his accessories.
It's actually fairly easy to find, complete with all of his accessories.
He's really just not a very popular figure and doesn't go for a lot on the aftermarket despite his age. He comes with such tiny little things like the antennas on his backpack and the back of his head, which aren't meant to pop off but can be missing. But despite that fact, he's actually a fairly sturdy figure on top of that, with a really good paint job, so you really don't often find him in bad condition either. But one interesting thing is I've noted a lot of people actually do use him in the backgrounds of his displays, because he does come with a lot of really nice techno gear. So he's a fairly good figure to display with a lot of more techno-oriented headquarters-like stuff. With his antennas, he looks like a communications officer, so if you want to have someone like Dial Tone or Breaker doing something else in your displays, well, you can always have this guy sitting in the headquarters of whatever base you've made. However, I use him quite differently, in that I actually use this bright green to the advantage. Whenever I have displays using my aircraft carrier on the deck, bright colors like this are fairly common. And if you put together his receivers, and instead of putting them on the surface of his wrists, put them behind and raise his arms, well, doesn't he look like a landing signal officer now? Just imagine these receivers as lights or flags. That's what I do, and he looks fairly good doing that.